All right. Uh, Hello, folks, and welcome to the Erie Canal Museum's first ever virtual lunchtime lecture series. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Derek Pratt, the educator here at the Erie Canal Museum. Oh dear, I hope this hasn't been playing for the last 5 minutes of us chit-chatting. Oh, no, okay. I got scared for a second. Anyway, hi, folks. I'm Derek Pratt, educator here at the Erie Canal Museum. Happy to be presenting our first ever virtual lunchtime lecture series. Many of you who are familiar with the Erie Canal Museum know that we usually do this lunchtime lecture series about every other month at the museum in our main gallery space, but due to COVID-19, we've been closed for the last several months. But we're finally finding a way to get that same content out to you, and we've been finding other interesting ways to share information about the Erie Canal and related topics, like our quarantine coffee hour, which our last regularly scheduled one is this Thursday at 10 a.m. Also right here on Facebook Live. We've got our deeper dive talks where we chat with an author of an Erie Canal related book. This month we're going to be talking with Dr. David Spinagle from WPI, who wrote about Amos Eaton, the founder of RPI. That'll be on Saturday, the 25th at 1 p.m. And we'll talk about how the Erie Canal impacted the development of the natural sciences in America. It's a pretty interesting topic there, and you can register for that. That's going to be on Zoom. You can register for that on our website. But anyway, let's talk a little about today's lecture, shall we? So like our usual lunchtime lectures, we ask for a $5 donation if you can. If you can't, that's all right too. And you can find the link to that in the description of this video. But anyway, I have the pleasure today of introducing Dr. John Hrabowski, who is a professor of history at Case Western Reserve University, as well as the senior historian and vice president for research and publications at the Western Reserve Historical Society. Those of you who are wondering where the Western Reserve is, that is in Cleveland, and not the one on the north shore of Oneida Lake, the one in Ohio. We're very happy to be hosting Dr. Hrabowski today to kick off this series, and he'll be looking at Ohio's canals, which can be in many ways seen almost as an extension of our beloved Erie. So that's enough for me. I'll turn it over to you, John.
Okay, thanks so much, Derek. And I'm glad everybody is here or there, or however we count visitors and people in an audience today. I've gotten used to being a Zooming professor for the last several months, and I guess I'm going to be Zooming this fall as well. I'm delighted to give this talk. It's going to be a little, as I told Derek, be a little Clevo-centric. There'd be a lot about Cleveland because the canal is critical to the history of Cleveland. It's simply made, one of the canals in Ohio is critical to the history of Cleveland. It simply made the city. And that's where I got my title from, between Europe and the Gulf of Mexico, because when the canal system was completed in Ohio, you could literally get on a boat in the port in Europe, go to New York, which would be made vastly richer thanks to DeWitt Clinton's wonderful idea of a canal across the northern part of New York State. Go up the Hudson River to Albany, get on a canal boat, go to Buffalo, get on another boat, find yourself in Cleveland. And if you really wanted to dig out, you could get onto a canal boat in Cleveland and go 308 miles south on the Ohio and Erie Canal to the Ohio River, and eventually find your way to the Gulf of Mexico. Now that sounds long and convoluted, but the idea for the Erie Canal was to open up the Midwest really to the east. And these canals made a connection really to the Gulf of Mexico. So long as the technology was dominant, This was an incredible, incredible invention. So that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the fate of one canal in particular, tell you how it came about, and maybe introduce you to some famous Clevelanders along the way. So let's go to the beginning here, and here's my obeisance to the Erie Canal and DeWitt Clinton, and DeWitt Clinton really is the man. There are several roads. There's a park in Cleveland named after Clinton. He was feted when the Erie Canal opened. The Ohio and Erie Canal would be begun the same year in 1825. We'll talk about that. And there's a scene off the Erie Canal. And the technology, as you probably know, was tried and true. It had been used in Europe before. And Clinton's story, of course, is that he envisioned the canal. Other people envisioned the canal. We'll talk about that in a second. But he couldn't get the feds to pay. And the states had to pay for these canals, which is ironic because the feds are involved, particularly one person, George Washington. This is a picture of Washington around 1753 when he had been sent out west by Governor Dinwiddie of Virginia to tell the French to get their forts out of what is now Pennsylvania. That began Washington's connection to the Ohio country, which lay a little bit beyond. Then he had another connection. Our founding father was a real estate entrepreneur, and he, like many Virginians, were looking at the Ohio lands as potential lands, and the Ohio company would actually buy part of Ohio. So he was interested in the waterways that connected, that might connect Lake Erie with the Ohio River, because water transport was the only transport of any means within that period in America. Roads were impossible. Roads could not handle heavy traffic. So he was looking at a way to connect the rivers in the north of Ohio to the ones that run to the south. And we're going to talk about in a little bit. He made himself rather famous by publishing the Journal of Major George Washington. And if you have a first copy of this printed in London, rather than in Williamsburg, and you have the map in it, it is extraordinarily valuable. We do have one at the Western Reserve Historical Society. But within this journal, he talks about what he saw on his way to the French forces on the Ohio, but he also talks about the potential of the Ohio country. And so that's where he's interested. We know that in the 1780s and 1790s, he's corresponding with Thomas Jefferson, trying to find water routes that are going to connect Lake Erie with the Ohio River. And that becomes something that's really of concern to people in Ohio once the Erie Canal is under construction, because that's going to open up the center of Ohio. Ohio, by the way, becomes a state in 1803. If you're interested in the Western Reserve, it's about 3.4 million acres of northeastern Ohio. It is a section of the Connecticut colonial claims that Connecticut was able to reserve when the nation was founded under the Articles of Confederation, and it was eventually sold to a group of real estate speculators known as the Connecticut Land Company. You're going to get a lot more here than you bargained for. And they could only buy that land after 1795, when Native American claims to the lands east of the Cuyahoga River were opened. And they chose one of their investors. There were 56 investors in this company, a man named Moses Cleveland, to go out and survey the area that would then be carved up into 5 square mile townships. And he chose the capital city of the Western Reserve, and it happens to be Cleveland, Ohio, which is situated at the mouth of the Cuyahoga River on Lake Erie. So that's sort of the setup for the canal. The other person who saw some importance during the canal for Cleveland, not so much the canal, was Benjamin Franklin, who had his finger in almost everything. And during the period of the French and Indian Wars, he looked at some early maps that showed rough sketches of Lake Erie, and he pointed out where the Cuyahoga River enters. And he said that would be a site of strategic importance, a place that the British could hold, and they could hold off the French. So Franklin's in on this too, but he's not a canal builder like Washington. Cleveland itself is settled in 1796. It is a slow-growing, incredibly uninspiring place. The river mouth is partially blocked. There's an old riverbed that is stagnant. It has malaria. Early settlers come down with what they call the ague, and they move away. And it's not until, we'll get to this later, the government provides some money to clear the sandbar at the mouth of the river and gives some more money that Cleveland begins to prosper. And it brings a New Yorker to Cleveland. This gentleman is going to actually build the Erie Canal, Ohio and Erie Canal for you. And I'm blanking on his name at this moment, but he's a New York lawyer, and we'll get to that in a second. He comes to Cleveland. He becomes the first village president for Cleveland in 1815 when Cleveland has a village. It's no longer his name is Alfred Kelly, just brought that up. And he's a lawyer, and he becomes the state legislature, and he gets involved in the state legislature in the 1810s after the War of 1812 is over, and people could settle with some ease in northeastern Ohio, feeling that the British are not going to conquer it back. And he begins to be a canal advocate. And Kelly does very well in Cleveland. This is his home in Cleveland. It no longer stands. It is the first brick home in Cleveland, torn down in 1850. It's on Water Street, which is now West 9th Street in Cleveland. It has a view over into the Cuyahoga River Valley, which is a very deep valley that separates Cleveland from the western part of the Western Reserve. And actually, at one point, there are two towns in Cleveland. One is Cleveland on the east side, and on the west side, when that is open for settlement in 1805, a little town called Ohio City is established there. There's a whole different lecture about the schism in Cleveland between two sides of the river. But that's really important because when Kelly is advocating for the canal and the state legislature is thinking about routes for the canal, they're thinking about three routes. They're thinking of one in the east, going down from the Lake Erie to the Ohio River, one in the center that would go straight through Columbus, the Ohio capital, and one on the west going through Toledo. The one in the center is not going to get built. The other two will be built. And the one in the east that we'll be talking about intensely, the Ohio and Erie Canal, actually jogs over a little bit toward Columbus. There's a little feeder canal that goes to it. But what Kelly is interested in is, where is the canal going to end when it gets to Cleveland? It can end on either the west side of the Cuyahoga River, or it can end on the east side of the Cuyahoga River. Now, the east side of the Cuyahoga River is the better place because that's where Cleveland is. And we know that Kelly has some real estate investments down on that bank of the river. Now, having said that about Kelly, you have to know that he's a fairly good dude. He got the legislation passed, and the state had to end up paying for the canal. They went to the federal government, just as you guys in New York did, and the federal government basically vetoed the legislation. The president vetoed it, I think, 3 times. So it was a self-financed canal. Kelly oversaw the construction. It came in on budget, all 308 miles. It was paid for with bonds. Those bonds were not paid off until the 1870s, at a time when the canal had very little value at all. So let's get into the canal. This is what Ohio Canal stock canceled. I couldn't get a higher resolution picture for you. But the state was still paying off those bonds, as I said, until 1870. This was a huge investment. I think it's like an $8 million at the time investment for the state of Ohio for the 2 canals. I think it was $7.145 million for the Erie Canal, if I'm not mistaken, which, if you do the math, is immensely expensive now. Both states would be really taxing and paying for these canals for a long time. The Cuyahoga River, and some of you may know it because it has the reputation of burning in the city of Ohio. The 1969 fire was a fire that was quite small, but it gained national and international attention. But the river had burned 14 times before that, at least. And it burned because as the city industrialized, we're going to meet one of the people who dumped a lot of junk in the river. But the Cuyahoga is really interesting because its headwaters, if you're looking at this image, are to your right. It starts north of Ohio in Cuyahoga County, north of Cleveland, slightly north, and flows southward until it hits the geographic divide, the hydrographic divide. And this is the very important portage divide that goes through Akron and Cuyahoga Falls. And it's known as the Portage Divide because Native Americans already had trails from Cleveland to the Portage where they would take their canoes, carry them over, and then get into the river systems to the south. That's what Washington saw. And that was going to be the route for the Ohio and Erie Canal. So you can see the river. It no longer burns. It's been cleaned up. As a matter of fact, they're pulling off one of the last dams in the river right now. There's a huge one in Cuyahoga Falls. But one of the last dams was actually put in the 1820s when they were constructing the canal as a diversion dam to feed the canal, feed water into the canal. Now we'll get to the point. That portion of the canal stayed watered until a long time, and they figured out a way to keep it watered once that diversion dam is out. Okay, enough blathering on. Let's get to the canal. This is the system. Best map I could find. And we're looking at the two canals. The one, the Miami and Erie Canal on the west, was started the same time as the Ohio and Erie in 1825. It was not completed until the mid-1840s. And part of that was that it was completed really between Cincinnati, which was the largest city in the state at that time, and Dayton. And then the last section was more difficult to build, and that took a while. That flows in, if you're looking at the maps, the Wabash and Erie Canal, which will go through into Indiana and then to the Ohio River. There's a Hocking Canal that comes off the Ohio River. There's a Pennsylvania and Ohio Canal that goes into Pennsylvania. We're going to see some traffic that goes, and the Sandy and Beaver Canal. Now, one of the famous people in Cleveland is a man named Marcus Alonzo Hanna. You may know his name. He was an iron and steel magnate, but he's more important because he became a political kingmaker, became a United States senator. He's literally the man that made William McKinley president. His family had invested in one of these canals, which failed. And the family was then forced, they were wholesale grocers, to go to Cleveland. And so he ended up in Cleveland, and that's where he met Charlotte Rhodes, who was a high school classmate, and her father owned an iron and coal company. He bought into it and became wealthy. More trivia than you'll ever want. The Ohio and Erie Canal was 308 miles long. As you said, there's a little Columbus feeder there. And this network of canals, if you look at the whole system throughout the eastern United States at this point, before the railroads came, this was transportation technology. And the Ohio and Erie Canal and the Miami and Erie Canal share the same specs that you would find on many canals. They're 4 feet deep, they're 26 feet wide at the base, and they're 40 feet wide at the top with a towpath on the side. The locks are initially constructed of cut stone. Later, they were improved with concrete as we had a variety of floods. The interesting thing is that the facts here, if I can find my notes for you, I have to refer to the notes on this one. And yeah, find it will be good. If I don't find it, we will be good. Yeah, here we go. Miami and Erie Canal was 274 feet miles long. And let me say that the thing with the Ohio canals is they had an incredible number of locks, and they had an incredible height to go over. So you're looking at, well, the Erie Canal was 363 miles long with an elevation change of 700 feet. The combined length of Ohio's canals was 557 miles with an elevation change, get this, of 2,096 feet. And so the maintenance on these canals and the locks was a killer. Okay, I thought I'd get to the basin. This is a early 1900s postcard to the Erie Basin in Buffalo, New York. This is the font of everything that's coming out to the Western Reserve. And even before the canal is built in Cleveland, we are already beginning to feel canal fever because of the Erie Canal. And once that canal is completed, well, the Ohio and Erie is being built. Its first segment is completed from Akron to Ohio in 1827. Commerce in Cleveland is beginning to boom. And so once that opens up, now Akron, before we get to Akron, we have to give note to a ship built around New York. It's called the Walk in the Water. It's 1818. It's the first steamboat on the lakes. More steamboats are on the lake by the time the canal is there. So you have a water transportation system that's really robust. Cleveland in 1839, after the canal was built, looks just like it was supposed to look when Moses Cleveland founded it. Moses Cleveland was a representative of the Connecticut Land Company, and Cleveland was going to be a Connecticut town. So it has a town square, the church on the square. It has its own little militia, the Cleveland Grays, who are still around. And this picture was painted by a man named Sebastian Heine. So it's a prosperous little place at this time. It wasn't before that. This is a map of Cleveland, 1837. I wish it were clear. You can see the public square almost at the center. Cuyahoga is a Native American word for crooked. This is the Crooked River. Now you know why it's crooked, particularly as it moves up to Cleveland. So you're looking at, if you're watching the thick line in the center, that's the river going around. As it goes around, it's known as the Oxbow section of the river. It's right across from Public Square, which is the center of the city, and then it flows out. Along the side, you see this little loopy line here, and that's the Ohio and Erie Canal coming up to the river. And it will join the river just about, if you follow that, if you go along that Oxbow loop before it makes a strong turn up to go into the lake, that's where the canal turning basin is. And Cleveland has the only way lock on the Ohio and Erie Canal. Important thing, because that makes it the center of commerce. Now, we're talking about the intervention for infrastructure and improvements. Cleveland becomes a federal port in 1805. Not many people here, but it's still a federal port. A man named Walworth is the first head of the port. We have his documents signed by President Jefferson at the Historical Society. In 1824, the federal government comes in for $5,000 for a pier to be built at the port. And in 1827, they cough up $10,000 to clear the channel, which is finally going to allow big ships to come up that river channel and to allow the river to flow faster, get rid of the mosquitoes and the ague, the malaria, if you want to call it that. In 1837, the feds provide money for a marine hospital for 6 sailors. It's built in 1852. By 1840, there has been a total of $70,000 invested in harbor improvement. And that's when the canal is a key. Let's look at some numbers about what the canal did here. This is merchandise south from Cleveland. And you can look at the figures as well as I can. Even in 1827, when it's only to Akron, it's 500,000 pounds. By 1838, when the entire canal is really robust, it's 19,000 pounds. Now, by 1838, we're going to have something called the panic. There's a financial panic that goes on. It's going to slow commerce down. The wheat prices go up considerably. Now, one of the things you probably know that in the center of Ohio, early settlers there, if they grew wheat or corn, they had no way of shipping it out. It was bulky and it was heavy. So they converted it into something that was more potable and more saleable, whiskey. And so whiskey was distilled from the grains. And it wasn't until the canal came in that they could really ship out huge loads of this. And we'll talk about more of this. 1840, wheat and flour shipped through Cleveland, 2.5 million bushels. Ship arrivals and departures from Cleveland, if you look at that number, it's 350 by the late 1830s, near 1,000 by 1844. After the panic is over, 1,600 ship arrivals. Here is something from article that's written about the canal, and it's by Sam Taburo, who's a historian for the National Park Service. I think it's worth reading. Maintaining the only waylock on the canal and its access to Lake Erie, Cleveland became the dominant port on the canal. Toledo gets shut out. If stuff's coming in from the Erie Canal, the first canal port that you can get to is Cleveland. Toledo suffers from that, so that the Miami and Erie Canal doesn't get that much profit. It's down, for example, in 1851, 2.5 million bushels of wheat, over 600,000 barrels of flour, 1 million bushels of corn, and 3 million bushels of coal arrived in Cleveland via the canal. There's a key. Coal is found in Tuscarawas, is found south of Cleveland in Mahoning County, and the canal goes near, one of the feeders goes there. So coal gets shipped up to Cleveland at that point. And 11 million pounds of merchandise is shipped southward from Cleveland to the interior of Ohio. So people are dressing better, they're eating better, they're doing better because of the canal. If we're looking at the size of cities over time, Buffalo is still winning in 1870, but you can see Cleveland growing up. Now, you'll notice the numbers for 1840 and 1850. There's a 1577 for OC, that's Ohio City, and 6,375 in Ohio City in 1854. In 1850 and 1854, the two cities would merge. There wasn't a high-level bridge connecting them, though, until 1878. So they were still fairly separated. You'll notice something interesting here in the rapidity with which Chicago grows, because it is now more centered with the growing West than Cleveland used to be. Akron, this is 1937. This is Lock 1 in Akron. There's no early picture. The photography comes into Cleveland with the daguerreotype in the late 1830s, 1840s. And I have one 1859 picture of the canal that I'll be showing you. This is 1937, it's Akron. Akron is not a city until the canal comes through. Now, Akron is situated on the Portage Escarpment, so it has a whole raft of locks. It's kind of like Lockport, New York. And so what do you do when your canal boat is getting locked up? Well, you go to the bar, or you go to the store, or whatever else. So Akron grows up around those locks. Now, in the late 1800s, it will become a center for rubber manufacturing. With the invention of automobiles, Akron becomes one of the most rapidly growing cities in the United States. Indeed, between 1910 and 1920, it's the fastest growing city in the US. So if you're an Akronite, there you go. This is the picture of the canal in Cleveland in 1859. It's the earliest known picture we have of the canal in Cleveland. You're looking at the white building in the far left is the weigh house, the weigh station. There are three major locks at the end of the canal, and there's a huge turning basin in Cleveland. It's about 150 by 200 feet in size, and it's just adjacent to the canal. And it's called the schooner turning station because you could bring lake schooners into the station and offload them there. So it's a transport area. The interesting thing is that many of the canal diggers were Irish. And they had come over after digging the big ditch in New York. They found their way into Cleveland. They were the first major Catholics in a very Protestant community at that time. Many of them lived on the west side of the canal. And indeed, if you look at the list of the stevedores unions of Cleveland over time, you'll find a lot of Irish American names there. They dominated those who loaded, non-loaded canal boats and ships afterwards. Now that we're containerized, you can't find that. So that's a priceless picture that we have. This is the other part of the canal. Where did it end? It ended in Portsmouth, Ohio. And I have one more picture of Portsmouth in this presentation, but this is a postcard done later that depicts Portsmouth in 1846. So it's a prosperous little town thanks to the canal. The other canal mouth is Cincinnati, which was already big, but Portsmouth was small, so the canal made Portsmouth. Not a lot in between, though. This is Cleveland in 1853. You're looking from the west side. This is the year before Ohio City, where you're standing, and you're looking toward Cleveland. The major street, that big one up the middle, is Superior Avenue, and it comes right down to the canal, and right down to the dock area. So the largest street in Cleveland was oriented down the hill to the docks. That wouldn't last. We'll see a picture of that later. Now, if we do a close-up of this is what's really interesting. This is that 1853 close-up, and if you're looking at the upper right-hand picture, you're looking at the canal coming in on the east side of the river, and then the river there, and it takes a loop around that oxbow, and it comes back around, and just to the left side here, you can see where Superior Avenue is coming down. You'll see very far left a little canal boat. It's docked through, it's come through the station, it's come through the last lock into the river. So this is where the canal meets the river. This was the action area. This was Cleveland's Flats. It was a place that people didn't want to go before the canal was opened. But guess what? When the canal opened, it was developed. There's a real interesting development here. If you look at the top, you see the canal basin, and there's a little batch under the Merwin Street there. And we're going to talk about a very famous guy who had an accounting house and a commodities brokerage on Merwin Street. But this is called Gravity Place, and this was a dream of about three people on the west side of the river. They bought up this land. It's part of Cleveland. So on the east side, it would merge. And if you look at the streets, you'll see they're named China, Russia, British, French, German, or whatever, Leonard and Orison Street. And Gravity Place is at the center. Now, there's a guy in Cleveland who has this theory that these streets all point out, like L'Enfance Washington, to different directions, and they mimic the setting of the sun. So I don't know if that's true, but he's on a roll now to redo Gravity Place. And this place, this has all redeveloped now. There's a fantastic, the Cleveland Metro Parks has a Merwin Street Wharf that you can go to now. I guess it's opened again with social distance seating, and you can watch the ships go up and down the river. So that's the flats becomes the place in Cleveland. If you go down the canal, once you get outside the city limits, you come to the Austen Powder Company. Guess what? They make black powder and blasting powder. And so having them outside the city limits is a good place for them. I was talking about the gentleman who came to Cleveland in the 1850s with his family. He came from a place called Richfield, New York. Came with his father, Big Bill, who never turned up, his father, and his mother and his siblings. His name is John Davison Rockefeller. And Rockefeller came to Cleveland. He went to high school at Central High School, where Marcus Hanna was a classmate. He met his wife, Laura Spellman, at Central High. And then he went to a commercial school in Cleveland where he learned bookkeeping and basically handwriting, and he got a job in a commodities business in Cleveland. And it's interesting because the canal made commodities transfer, and the lake made commodities transfer a huge business in Cleveland. So Merwin Street, the Oxbow area, was loaded with places that bought and sold wholesale produce that's coming in by lake steamer and remarketed it. Now, his break comes during the Civil War. If you don't know the story about Cleveland, you should read Ron Chernow's book called Titan. It's really good. His break comes during the Civil War because the commodities business just goes crazy. Somebody has to supply the Union Army, and the Mississippi River is not a way to ship goods down because the Confederates hold it. So lake ports like Cleveland get more traffic, and his profits go up several fold by this time. And then in 1863, he gets into a new commodity that's coming out of the ground in Pennsylvania. You know Drake's Well, late 1850s, and a bunch of Clevelanders begin to invest in petroleum. He brings it back to Cleveland. He eventually will, long story short, he starts the Excelsior Oil Works on a little branch of a river that ends up in the Cuyahoga River. That's where the crap comes down, excuse me, and that's where the fires start. And that becomes Standard Oil in 1870. By 1885, he's wealthy enough to move part-time to New York, and he goes on to become one of the richest men in the world. Clevelanders lament his part-time loss. We always wanted to make sure that we would get Rockefeller Center, but believe me, I have a lecture on Rockefeller, and we've got a lot of money out of this man and the people who made money with them, including the Severances and the Harknesses. But that's his start. It's on Merwin Street, on the Cuyahoga River, and it's the canal, and I just mentioned the railroads, which are going to take care of the canal. And there it is. This is also 1859. This is Cleveland's first railroad station. Now, the city had planned to do railroads in the 1830s, but the panic of 1837 interfered, and investors didn't come forward. So our first railroad, the Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati, came in 1851, and automatically that began to diminish packet travel on the canal a lot faster. And it also began to pull traffic off the canal in goods because railroads could haul faster. Canals in the north froze in the winter. They had problems with spring floods and freshets. Not that the railroads were entirely free of that, but they were faster. They cost a bit more, but that's the speed made the railroads dominant. This is off of Water Street where Kelly lived. This is the old railroad station in Cleveland, the first one. It looks a lot better than our Amtrak does today. As Cleveland grew, this is the first high-level bridge over the river. And by the 1878, when this bridge was created, the canal had gone into disuse. And we'll look at some figures there. So you're looking from the east side to the west side. You'll notice that first railroad has been under the bridge there. It is now laid on the route of the canal. In 1861, the state sold off the canal to private entrepreneurs along the canal banks. And those entrepreneurs did what they wanted to with the canal. The state would eventually bring it back in 1871. But by that time, the canal had gone to rack and ruin in many areas. In Cleveland, the city of Cleveland decided that they wanted to buy the canal within the city limits. And so they did, and then they turned it over to, they sold it to the Cuyahoga Valley Railroad Company, which laid its tracks in Cleveland on the canal bed from Dilley Avenue, which is near the steel mills in Cleveland, right up to the old turning basin. If you still look carefully, we'll get to this later, you can find a section of the old turning basin. But the canal in Cleveland has now become, it still is a railroad. We could talk about that more. And this is the railroad station that was built there in the 1890s. You're basically looking at the lower level. This was the Valley Railroad became part of the Baltimore and Ohio system. So this is the back of the system. You're looking up, you can see that hillside going up the hill to where Public Square is, the city is. Let me show you the front of the station. This is totally abandoned now. Right down the street are the headquarters of Sherwin Williams, which was built along the railroad and the canal. More stories about Sherwin Williams, but the river valley, I wish I had more pictures of it, but this is what happens to the canal over time. And this is the same thing, these are the same metrics you're going to find for the Miami and Erie Canal as well. The railroads come in, you can see the drop during the panic period in revenue, and then you can see revenue sink below by 1860. It boots up a little bit, and then it's below until 1900. The canal is going to last until 1913. We'll discuss what happens to the canals of Ohio in a few seconds. Let's look at some older pictures. Older photographs of the Ohio and Erie and Miami Canal are almost all from the latter part of the 19th century. When people lived on canal boats, there was a little bit of commerce taking place. There were tours that were taken on canal boats. For instance, in Cleveland, when the Canal Lock was moved up to Dilley Avenue, it was in the middle of a Czech neighborhood. And we have stories from old Bohemian immigrants to Cleveland who used to go down to the canal before 1913, and they would get on the boat for an excursion to go up the river. So they were excursion boats that went up the canal, not the river. So there's one picture, and you can see the Hoji is a woman. And one of the most famous Hojis on the Ohio and Erie Canal was James A. Garfield, who would go on to become president. Unfortunately, a very short-lived president. This is the Miami and Erie Canal. Later in the century, if you look carefully, the young man who is standing in the right side is absolutely nude. He's skinny dipping in the canal. Another picture a little later of a tour boat going up one of the canals. I believe this is the Ohio and Erie. This is an earlier picture. I couldn't place it for you, but it shows several canal boats parked or docked, if you will. This is a similar picture with a family living on the canal boat. That's what happened. You had no longer package. You had families living on canals, on canal boats and canals. Very much what you find in the river systems in Europe, particularly in the towboats that go up and down the Rhine. I love this picture. This is at home on the boat. Here's another one. And I'll bore you with one more picture, I believe. This is the lock tender's house. You're going to see it again when I get to the contemporary canal. This was known, and we can't prove this, as Hell's Half Acre. Supposedly, it was a house of prostitution in the canal days. Supposedly, it was where the ladies of the house hung their legs out of the upper windows to entice the boatmen in. Now, there may be a lot of apocrypha to this, but it's a darn good story, and I thought I'd fit it into the canal story for you. But this looks like a family outside and not a group of prostitutes. So the family would live at these, until the canal was closed in 1913, the families lived at these lock keepers' houses because somebody had to keep the lock. This is Broadway Evidence, postcard, early 1900s before the canals closed. I'm going to take you down to a little town in the southern part of the Ohio and Erie Canal. It's called Zoar, Z-O-A-R. It's important because It was a community started by a group of German separatists. We have their records in old German script at the Historical Society. They were a separate sect. They were off on their own. And then the canal came through, and they're commemorated. Zor and the Ohio and Erie Canal. In 1825, the Society of Separatists of Zor contracted to build 7 miles of the Ohio and Erie Canal, including 4 locks just southwest of the village. Payment for the work completed in 1829 allowed the society to settle its land debt. This brings up a point. Who dug the Ohio and Erie Canal? And it was dug by farmers and separate contractors all along the way. And that set a standard of bad standards. And some of it was built better than other parts. And that's what the canal inspector had to try to keep an eye on, but it was built separately all the way down, but it did come in on budget. Zor today, not Zor. So what happens to the canal in Cleveland? This is the American Steel and Wire plant in Cleveland. This is a picture taken in the 1930s or 1940s. If you look to the left, you can see a little streak down there, and that is what was the canal. And it goes up, if you follow it through, and there's the river coming up towards the right center, and it goes in. American Steel and Wire needed water to cool its operations. It started in 1907. When the canal was closed, and we'll get to that reason in a second, in 1913, it basically kept that section of the canal open for water to come in to continue the cooling process. And that's what allowed part of the Ohio and Erie Canal to survive. This is what happened in 1913, one of the worst floods in the history of Ohio. It hit the western part of the state particularly hard. Dayton, Ohio is one flood image here. And this is Tiffin, Ohio in 1913. These floods were the worst known, and they washed out the remainder of the canals. The state saw no reason to rebuild the canals. They were abandoned at that point. So some sections were left over time. We're lucky in Cleveland because that section that American Steel and Wire had continued to hold water, and we're luckier still, and you're going to see where the canal is today. There are a couple of locks left around in northeastern Ohio. This is a rather contemporary photograph. But some of the locks, and this is the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, which was started in 1974 as a national recreation area. It stretches from Cleveland to the south of Cleveland to Akron. It saved that portion, a very sleepy part of the Cuyahoga Valley, from being developed to God knows what. And it's a wonderful place, but that's where the canal went through. And the reason that area of Cleveland got saved, that area south of Cleveland got saved, is because once the canal closed down, there was no reason for business there. And so it stayed almost in stasis as it was in the late 19th, early 20th century. Now, interestingly enough, that Valley Railroad went along there, but it had very few stops. This is Mill Creek. This is a contemporary photograph of one of the aqueducts that's still there. Mill Creek flows into the Cuyahoga River. And so like the Erie Canal, you had to build aqueducts over water to get the canal going. I always find those fascinating. This is one at Tinker's Creek. Now I know there's a Tinker's Creek aqueduct on the Erie Canal as well. And this is one on the Ohio and Erie Canal. And these have been rebuilt over time. But what you're seeing on that pathway, you see the boards, there's a bike path there. It's the towpath turned into a bike path. We're going to get to that in a second. This is Akron. The city of Akron kept a lot of the locks open for water supply. They tended to flood over time. So you can see how Akron is built up around the locks. Now they blew apart lock number 1, okay? This is Portsmouth. There's no canal left there. This is one of the locks in Portsmouth. Welcome to the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. This is what has saved the canal. This and the towpath, the bicycle towpath that they are building along the canal that is going to stretch from Cleveland, right from the canal basin, all the way down to Zor, Ohio. You can bike all the way to Akron right now if you want to. And this is what it is. This is the bike path along the canal. It's a great place to bike. I used to bike it, but right now I'd rather street bike because not everybody's wearing a mask on the towpath. This is down in the Cuyahoga Valley. This is the Route 82 bridge over the valley. This is close to where that dam has just been taken out. You can see the towpath trail going along. You can see the canal and you can see the river going there. So this is the beginning of that water part of the canal. This is Hell's Half Acre as it is today. It is an interpretive center for the canal. So we still have an interpretive center. This is looking at one of the developments in Akron where the canal goes right through the shopping mall. And this is Zorzio, Ohio today. It basically prospered because of the canal. The bike path's going to be there. The thing that is I-77 is, parallels the canal down there. When you get through Tuscarawas County, that's what the freeway now is what the railroad used to be. If you go to Canal Fulton, they still have an operating canal boat in a little section of the canal you can go to. This is what the towpath trail is going to look like when it is completed, all the way past Canton down to Zorzio, Ohio. So that's where it will be. And what we're doing in Cleveland right now is we're taking that whole canal basin area. The hardest part of the bicycle path to extend has been the northern part, because a lot of it goes through areas that are industrialized. A lot of them are brownfields. So we've had to jigger the canal, the bicycle path through an area called Tremont and around and around. But eventually it is going to end up at the lakefront, and it is also going to branch off into the canal basin. So what you're looking at there, the bridge right up to the top, which is the Detroit Superior Bridge, that last couple of arches over before it goes to the building, you can see the dotted line. That's where the canal basin was. That's where the canal ended up. So this is what Cleveland is looking forward to now. The interesting story about Cleveland, if you don't know it, is that Cleveland prospered in the late 19th century. By 1920, it was the 5th largest city in the United States. Its population was 2/3 foreign birth or foreign parentage. Another 35,000 were African American. The value of its industrial production in 1920 was 5th highest in the United States. We're a different city now. We have fewer than 400,000 people. We're dealing with a new economy. We're dealing with new demographics. All the old canal towns along the Erie Canal are seeing the same thing happening. But what we're trying to do here is to take this part of our heritage, the Ohio and Erie Canal, and walk with it and make it work. So if you go down to that park now, we have a replica of Lorenzo Carter's cabin. We have a monument to the people who fled the famine, the Irish who came into Cleveland. There are more monuments coming up there. The whole area here, which used to be warehouses, is now one of the hottest real estate deals in the city. People much younger than I are buying properties down there, and downtown Cleveland is becoming a place to live. So that's the change that we're seeing. But the canal is going to be a part of it. Portsmouth, I don't know. I don't know what Portsmouth is doing, but you can still see facing the river. The river still has an influence there. That Portsmouth is a rather large town. And that may be it for my PowerPoint. So I would welcome any questions you have.
All right. Well, that was fast. It's incredible how many parallels there are between Cleveland and Syracuse, where we are.
Yeah, you know it. Yeah.
I all the way up to the bike paths, because we're having one along. We're building one.
Yeah.
And we're the hard.
Our old railroads become bike paths too. That's the same thing.
Yep. So that's pretty interesting. Let's check out some of the questions. One person asked if there are any museums that are canal focused, which you answered for the most part there.
There's some. The Historical Society, when we reopen, has a wonderful exhibit called Cleveland Starts Here. And that really gets into the canal period as well.
Okay. Let's see. Another, someone asks if it's true that, so this is actually a story that we often tell at the Erie Canal Museum, that Ohio owns Toledo and Michigan got the Upper Peninsula largely because it was going to be the canal terminus?
I know a bit about that. I know there was a border dispute, and I'm not sure, so I can't with any authority answer that question. Sorry, I'm blanking out on that one.
No problem. One question I had, because you were talking about the revenue that the canal generated, and the Erie Canal Museum, we're in one of the waylocks where we charge tolls in the Erie. How did they make money on the Ohio Canal?
Oops. Lost you, Derek. Okay.
Oh, yep. Did they have waylocks, or how did they charge tolls and stuff on the Ohio Canal?
So far as I know, that they were probably lock fees as they locked up.
Ah,
But I know the main waylock and the only one on the canal was in Cleveland, which is really what drove a lot of money to Cleveland.
that's interesting. Okay.
And what Cleveland did is when they tore out that waylock, they created another one at Dilly Avenue, and then also created another lock, actually a branch into the Cuyahoga River there.
Oh, all right.
And we know that one of the producers of well, a company called Griselli Chemical produced sulfuric acid for Rockefeller's oil refinery, and that new waylock was right near Griselli Chemical. So we speculate that Griselli was shipping stuff in and out.
That's something. Another person asked in the comments, is more a question, I think, for me. If the Erie Canal Museum, if the boat that we have was built by Burleys and Marshall of Ticonderoga, I looked at the article that they shared in that. It does not appear so, since those were actually contemporary ones. Ours was built in the 1960s. So sadly, no. But I did notice, speaking of canal boats, also in your pictures, there were some odd-shaped boats, I felt like, where they have like a raised front and raised back. Were those lumber or?
I think it's probably be lumber and bulk goods. That would probably be the shipping that they could continue at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a guess on my part.
All right. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. And also, I was wondering, was there double lock? Like, so you mentioned like they had flights of locks. Did they have double locks, or was it just single?
I'm going to speculate that they may have had those in Akron, but elsewhere I've never seen them.
Oh, okay.
So it would basically be lock up, go over, and then lock down. There would have been a queue at either end.
Yeah, I'm just finding that, yeah, because we've had several people talk about different canals, and the Erie seems unique.
I'd have to double check on that, but I suspect Akron, which was a huge bottleneck, if you will, and that's again, just a lot of business to be done there while the ships, where the canal boats are being locked up and down.
Oh, yeah, I could imagine. Let's see. Do we have any other questions here in the comments? Not looking like it. But this has been wonderful. Thank you very much, John.
You're very welcome, Derek. And everybody should come to Cleveland when you can.
Yes, I'll have to add your museum to my list after the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You know?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you got it. Okay.
Okay. Well,
thank you. Take care, everybody.